Thank you again for joining us for Lunch with DASI. Again, my name is Jim Byrne, and this is working with the design library inside of SOLIDWORKS. The design library, the simple explanation for this tool is it's a place to store commonly used items. You might be surprised what it can be used for. It could be used for library features that you can drag and drop into parts, sheet metal features that you can drag and drop into sheet metal components, annotations, blocks, symbols, things of that nature, even GD&T that you can drag and drop into detailed drawings, and components for assembly documents. In fact, one of the other things that I want to mention is it can even be used to store features for FEA and motion studies. And all of these I'm going to try to cover today. One of the things that I'm going to point out is when I decided to do this webinar, it got a lot bigger than I thought. As I kept on diving deeper into what the functionality of the design library, I found out, wow, I don't know if I can cover everything here in just 1 hour. So if I do miss anything, then please feel free to send me an email or a question at the end of the presentation, and I'll do my best to answer those. But what you may find is some of the things that I'm going to mention are some of the fundamentals of using the design library, but hopefully you'll notice that I'm going to show you a few things that you didn't know as well. I have a feeling that almost everyone in this presentation is going to find 2 or 3 items they did not know the design library does. Now, I'm going to start with just library, well, actually the interface real quick, but library features is probably the biggest item that I want to tackle because it's probably the one that almost everyone will eventually use. Let me jump into SOLIDWORKS. First of all, the design library is something that's contained inside of the task pane. The task pane should always show up over here on the right-hand side of the screen. Now, if it doesn't, for some reason, which I have seen happen before, it might have been an accident, but when you right-click on one of your toolbars inside of SOLIDWORKS, there is an option to turn on or off the task pane. It's right here. So I'm going to make sure this is on, of course. And the other thing worth mentioning is during this presentation, I want the Design Library tab always to be shown. So I'm going to click on the push pin over here to keep it visible. It does take up a lot of real estate, so typically you probably have this push pin turned off. Again, this tab right here is what I'm going to be focusing on, the Design Library. I'm especially going to be using this Design Library folder. There are some other items in this tab that are worth mentioning, but I don't have time to cover them in depth today, like the toolbox for storing commonly used fasteners, bushings, and gears. The 3D Content Central and SOLIDWORKS content, I may talk about those a little bit later in the presentation. These are very important items. But again, I'm focusing on this tab right here, this folder. Basically, these folders are just pointers over to a folder either on your local hard drive or over on the server. There's always this default one that shows up that's pointing to somewhere on your C drive for SOLIDWORKS. But you do have the ability with this button up here to add more file locations, either to your local hard drive or somewhere else. So you do have the ability to right-click on these and delete them as well. It doesn't delete the folder, it just deletes the file location. This is a nice button actually, because in the past you had to go to your options under file locations and point to these items right here under Design Library. So you can define those right there as well. The other button that I'm going to be using quite a bit is this Add to Library option. And this enables you to add all the different types of features and components to your design library. So again, we're going to start with features. I want to create one from scratch to begin with, so I'll start a new component. For those of you who are new to these webinars, as I go through this, feel free to ask some questions, and I'm going to try to look to my right over here where there are questions, and I will try to repeat the question as well to make sure everyone knows what I'm answering. But some of the questions I might need to go back to after we're done with the presentation. One other question that I'd like to know, since I'm creating library features from scratch, is have you created library features from scratch? Okay. I'm sharing this one. This is a bit what I expected. I expected that more folks have not created them from scratch, and that's one of the reasons why I'm running this this presentation. I want to make sure that everyone knows the advantages of using the design library and just how powerful it is. Okay, so I'll start with this one, and I'm going to give you as many tips as I can as I walk through this. For example, the first one that I want to mention is when you create a feature that you're going to save for another component, be sure that you're not relating that feature or any of these any sketch relationships to the base that you're creating it on, because the base is not going to be included in the library feature when you're done. Now, I'm going to break that rule right away, actually, and create a sketch relationship to this outer edge of my base and make that concentric. I'm doing that because I want to use that as a reference when I use it in another part. And you're going to notice that once I use this in another component. Well, I'll go ahead and extrude that up. We'll create a few other features in here. Again, one of the things that I want to mention is I'm not creating any relationships to other items that are part of the base feature or any other features in this design. Okay. I'm going to add some pins in here too because I want something that I can change later. Notice again that I'm avoiding using or creating a relationship to the origin because the origin is part of the base of this part document. It's not coming with my feature. And we'll add an offset dimension in here. Okay, I'll add just a little circle for a boss or a pin and extrude that up. In fact, we'll round that off too. And I do want more pins, so we'll go ahead and create a circular pattern. And again, when I create the pattern, I want to make sure I'm not referring to this edge, that I'm referring to this edge right here of one of my library features. So once you have something that you want to use for future use, then here's how this goes. There's a few ways of doing this. My suggestion would be to select the features in your feature manager that you want to use for your library feature. Then pick on this button up here in your design library, Add to Library. This, in my case, I don't know if it's in everyone's case, but sometimes it takes a minute for this to pop up. So be a little patient if it's the same for you. Wait for that to pop up. You can select the folder that you want to place it in. In fact, you can predefine the folder by selecting it first before you click on the Add to Library button. So choose your folder, give it a name, and accept it. And it will get added to that folder in your design library. And it has a different file extension. It's an SLD LFP file extension. So you also have the ability to use the Save As function, and you'll find it in here as well if you want to choose a location this way. Save it as a library feature. Now I'm going to go ahead and close this out and we can try it. I want to make some modifications to it, but we'll take a look at this one first. When you drag and drop it in, you'll see that it gives you somewhat of a preview as you move it over to your design. When I release it, let's take a look at the Property Manager tab. It automatically selects the face that it's going to drop it on for that reference. Now I created that concentric relationship for that circle on my, my boss extrude. And so it's waiting for that reference. And I can go ahead and select this edge, and so it knows where to define itself. Okay. Another thing I want to mention is in this property manager under size dimensions, you can override the dimensional values. And basically this means that you can make any changes you want to this, and it doesn't affect the original library feature that you created. Okay, it becomes independent. The only issue that I have with the one that I created is I don't really know for the most part what these dimensions are unless I remember what those values were when I created it. So let's go back and make this a little bit easier to understand if we're going to make these changes. I'll go ahead and edit the one that I created. Let's take a look at the feature manager tree. There's some differences between a library feature file and a regular part file. First of all, the icon looks a little bit different. It has the set of library books for an icon. There's other folders that have been added, like references. This is the plane that I started my sketch on for my first feature. This is the edge I used for that concentric relationship. Again, you don't want to have too many of these. And then there's also the dimensions that are used in those features. See, we've got all these dimensions are D1 and D2 at the sketcher feature that they were created from. And then we have locating dimensions and internal dimensions that I'll mention in just a second. Down below that, there's the features that we had added. And notice that each one of them that we selected has a little L over top of it. That's a little bit hard to see, but it's there. And I want to mention that I'm going to add another feature to this component in just a minute. Let's go back up to dimensions. Well, some of these dimensions I do want to change, and some of them I don't. For example, the height of my boss, I might want to be able to change that. And you notice that you can select these dimensions to rename them. Let's see, I'll call this one my OD. And what else do I have? The height of my pin, or the length of my pin, whatever we want to call it. And we could also add the number of instances for the circular pattern. Sometimes I don't know what these dimensions are because it doesn't highlight them very well, but if I double click on them, at least I can see what the value is and make sure that I pick the right one. Now the other dimensions I don't really care to see, so we can drag and drop those into the internal dimensions folder. Okay, so these 4 dimensions are the only ones that I care about. Again, we can also add features to our design. Maybe we want a chamfer in here, a small chamfer. Now that chamfer shows up at the bottom of my tree, and it doesn't have an L in front of it, so it will not show up when we drag and drop it into another part document. But if I right-click on it, there's an option to add it to the library. And then you'll see the little L in front of that feature too. Another thing that happens is those 2 dimensions for the chamfer show up here. We might want to drag and drop those into internal dimensions as well. Well, I'll go ahead and save this one. We'll give it a try. Drag and drop it in. Select our edge as a reference. And then down here at the bottom under size dimensions, see now we can change, or we can see that these aren't just D1 and D2 dimensions. And as I change the values, it will give a preview as we change them. Maybe I want a different length for the pin, or a different number of pins. We can make this 10. Okay, so once you change all those dimensions, we can accept this feature in our design. Another thing worth mentioning is if you right-click on that feature, actually let me first expand it. You can see there's all the features in a folder now. If I right-click on that and edit the feature, I go back into the same property manager that we were just in. So you can make changes to that feature real easily. without having to pick on the features from the graphics view. Now, if you don't care about having that feature in the tree, you can also right-click on it and actually dissolve it. So that'll just drop all the features right into the top level of your part. Well, there's another way of doing this that I want to mention. It's using configurations. See, when you drag and drop this into another part, you might want to just simply choose a specific style, or you might want to choose from a list of options instead of changing the dimensions manually. And that could be done through configurations. See, I just have the one configuration in here now. Well, if I right-click on a dimension, many of you have made configurations before. Use the configure dimension option. And then we can create a list of configurations to choose from. And maybe I'll create configurations based on the number of pins that we have in this feature. Maybe I'll have one that has no pins in it. Okay. So now when I tell it how many instances are in that circular pattern, it's going to show up in each of those configurations. If I have a configuration with no pins, then I can double-click on my original one and make sure it's checked to be suppressed. And the pattern will be suppressed too because it's a child of that feature. So we can create those configurations. In fact, we can take a look at them so you can see them. Double-click on each one. I can delete my default configuration. And we'll go ahead and save that. Now, watch how this one works. Drag and drop it in. See, here's my list of configurations to choose from. I'll pick this edge to locate it. You get a preview of the configuration as you select it. There's the one with no pins in it. And if you look down here, you still have the ability to override the dimensions of that one configuration. So you've got these 5 configurations plus maybe a custom one that you want to create when you drag it in. If you want to take it a step further, you could also check this box to link it to the original library file. If you make changes to the original library feature, it will update in this component. So there's a look at how we create some of these library features from scratch. There's a couple of other examples that I wanted to show. Some of you out there need to create library features that are revolve cuts, and that I want to address as well. If you want to do a revolve cut, then you need a plane because you can't use these planes in your library feature, or you shouldn't be, or the origin once again. So what I would do is start a sketch on this face of your base feature, create something that you can make a plane off from, like a center line, and then make your plane. Okay, I'm just going to create a plane that's perpendicular to the end of that center line. And then we can start a sketch on that plane and generate our profile for the revolve cut. I'll just make something simple here. I'm not going to take a lot of time to dimension this. We'll just leave it underdefined and do our revolve cut. And once again, if you want to make a library feature out of this, simply grab those items from your tree, pick on the Add to Library button, and then give it a name. Make sure again that you have the correct folder selected. You want to be sure that you take a look at sometimes the file extension. For some reason, it was saving it off as a block instead of a library feature. So be aware of that. Okay. Okay, so when you drag and drop these in, you can see you can drag it to any flat face, or plane for that matter, and generate your library feature. Okay, I don't have any dimensions in this one, so there's no dimensions to modify. You also have the ability to pick on Edit Sketch. If you pick on the Edit Sketch button from the Property Manager, then you can define with dimensions where you want to place this feature over to existing edges to define exactly where it goes. There is more of an automated way of doing this. There are such things as locating dimensions. Personally, I find that adding the dimensions when I drag and drop it in is a bit easier. Okay. There's another button that I want to mention too for modifying the sketch, which doesn't really apply here. It applies more to items that need to be rotated. I also get a number of questions about creating threads. This is something that I made last night that I thought may come in handy for a few of you. I created this library feature that I could drag and drop onto a shaft for an external thread. Again, I started a sketch originally on this top face and made a helix and a profile for a swept cut. So I just need to pick on this outer edge to define where it goes. And this is kind of nice because I can then override some of the dimensions to define the thread depth. If I want to make it 1.5, make it go a little bit deeper, change the pitch, make it a bigger pitch or a smaller pitch. So, if you want to create threads real quickly, you could make a library feature out of that too. This suite can be created any way that you want. In fact, I could make this one available in case anyone wants to, if anyone asks for it later, I can make sure that I get it over to you. Now, it's not perfect. I made it real quick last night, so I may need to make some modifications to it. But it does work for any size shaft too. If I decide that I want this to be a little bit smaller, it should work on any size. See, it looks a little bit bigger at first, but then once I choose my edge, see, it'll go to any size that I choose. There's another one that I think I might want to mention too. It's a set of holes. I think I'll go with this one right here. It's a part that has counterbore holes in it. Let's take a look at a shaded view. Let's make that a little bit bigger too. Now this one has a series of holes already placed in it, and you notice that these 4 points right here those are the locations of the whole feature, but I also added some additional center lines in there to define the corner of the plate that it's going to be connected to. So I've created this sketch ahead of time in that feature. I also put some dowel holes in there. So let's see how this one works. When you drag and drop it into a new component, of course you can drop it anywhere, there's again this option to edit the sketch. And then I can take those corners and drag and drop them over to this part. So this way, if I change the size of the component, see, it updates the locations of those holes as well. Okay. Let me take a look at the questions here. Some of these questions I might get back to you near the end. I got a question about thread that I created. Can you use twist along path for the extrude? I did actually give that a try, and I was a bit unsuccessful, but that might be an option. That's something that I can probably talk to you offline with too, but I did give it a try. It just didn't work. Let me talk a little bit about the sheet metal features real quick. This one I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but there are some features that you might want to drag and drop into other sheet metal components. There are some forming tools that are already inside the software in the original design library for embosses or extruded flanges, lances, louvers. And those do work. I will warn you that some of these features are fairly old, and they were created with the old format, meaning if you drag and drop them in, they're not always consistent. There's a newer method for creating forming tools, and that's what I'm going to show you here. It's kind of interesting, actually. The old way to make these forming tools work is they had to be placed in a folder called forming tools. So you had to make sure you didn't rename that folder. I'm going to go ahead and make one of these. In fact, I'll make a louver and show you how that works. It's pretty simple. Again, just make sure that you don't create any relationships to the edges of your base feature or over to the origin. Okay. And then I'll go ahead and revolve that 90 degrees. In fact, we'll throw a fillet in there. And you'll notice that I'm creating this as a solid. When you're creating a form feature, you don't have to shell this or make it thin, or you just basically create it as a solid, and then it takes the thickness of the material in the sheet metal component. You need to use the forming tool button inside of the sheet metal tab. When you pick on that, it will ask you for a stopping face, where it's going to, this is the face that you're going to use as your base for dragging and dropping it in. And then the faces to remove. You don't have to pick anything. But if there is a face that is open, like a hole of some sort, then you can choose those faces as well. Now this time, we don't pick the features from the tree before saving. You'll just simply save this whole thing off as a form tool. And I find that this one works best by using the Save As function for SOLIDWORKS. Pick the form tool option for your Save As type, and then place it in a folder somewhere. And then we can give it a try. I'll open up this part here. I just need a sheet metal component, and we'll go to that folder that I saved it in. See, when you drag and drop it in, you get a preview of what it looks like. Use your tab key on your keyboard to change it, whether it's coming up or down. And then you can use this to either change the location of it by adding dimensions, or you can also rotate this sketch as well. And this is something that I haven't shown yet. But be sure you remember this. Under your Tools pull down, under Sketch Tools, there is an option called Modify. And when you pick this, it enables you to rotate or translate that sketch. Now, I use this so often that I decided to add it to my S key so I can access it a bit more quickly. Modify Sketch. Again, that's under Tools, Sketch Tools, Modify. And then you can type in an angle, like for example 45, and every time you hit Enter on your keyboard, it will rotate it to that angle. Okay. And then you can click Finish. Now you can, of course, drag more of those in, but you have the ability to add linear patterns as well if you want to pattern this feature. And you can make these pretty complex. See, I've got another one in here that I can drag and drop in to take a look at. So you can, there can be a lot of features in these designs for sheet metal. Now you want to, if you do create these, just keep in mind that they do not flatten. These features are just for visual purposes only, or for detailed drawings. Those features don't flatten in there. Okay, annotations for drawings. Let's pull up an existing drawing. You can also save notes, symbols, GD&T, blocks inside of the design library. And I've got some examples here. See, you'll notice that depending on the type of item that you save, it's got a different symbol on it. If it's just a note, it looks like that letter A. So we can drag and drop these in, pick other locations if you want more of them. But see, we're just dragging and dropping those notes in here. So yeah, just anything you want to add to the design library, simply create a note. In fact, I'll make a sample note here. It works just like the part features, where you select the note that you want to save and then pick on Add to Library. It's as simple as that, and then you can give it a name. And you may want to add some references inside of these notes as well, and I'll mention that in just a minute. So give this note a name and go ahead and accept it. Then we've got a new note that you can use in other drawings. In fact, it shows you a preview of the note too when you hover over these. Let me show you an example of a block once, because I want to get involved with adding some references to these nodes and blocks. I'm going to create an item that has sketch entities and notes in it. In fact, I'll drag that down just a little bit. Now, one of the things I really want to point out is this block that I'm creating is going to take custom property information from the view that it's going to be connected to. So it's very important, in my case, that I create this block inside of another view. And you'll see why when I use it later. Okay, we'll add some more sketch entities here. This is going to be a detail block. And I'll just put in some various notes in here. Let's see, we'll turn off the leader, center justification. I want this to be my detail number, so I'm going to go ahead and use the link to property option and link it to the view that the block is going to be attached to. Okay. And see, I'll add another one in here for maybe quantity. Again, we're going to link it to the view. Quantity of that component. Let's see, we'll do something like the part number. I'll add a couple more here. Link it to the view. And maybe material is my last one. Now this component that this is attached to has all these properties. Your part may not have the properties in there yet, so they might not show up. Now that we have these nodes and entities in here, we can create a block out of that. You can just simply make a window selection around all those items, right-click on the screen, and make it a block. Go ahead and accept that. And then we can add this over to our design library. Pick on your block and pick on Add to Library, just like we did for the note and library features. You'll notice that we are saving it as a block. That automatically notices that. We'll give it a name and use it inside of a drawing. Now the reason I made this one is because there's still some folks out there that are creating multiple details in one sheet. So you can't necessarily rely on the title block for all of those details. Then let's zoom in a little closer here. When I take that detail block and drag and drop it in, you'll notice that it will take on the properties of that view. See, I'm looking at this part right now, but if I drag it down to this other one, notice that the items change. The material and all the information updates based on the view that I drag it to. So I can drop one here, I can drop one down here. Okay, so I can just keep on dropping new detail blocks on each one of these views because it will take on the properties of that view. And that again is why I made sure that the block was created within a view of just an example component. Otherwise, you won't get the option to link the property to the view. Okay. Oh, and you'll notice that it will remain as part of that view wherever you move it around, which is fine. Let's talk about components for a couple of minutes. When it comes to parts, they do work a bit differently. You can store parts inside of these folders, just like library features and notes and things of that nature. And again, it's just quicker access to these components whenever you need them. In fact, you might have a new design library folder that's just for your library of components, so that they don't have to all be mixed in the same place. When you drag and drop a part in, you can, of course, place this component anywhere you want inside the assembly. There's ways of making this a bit easier. First of all, I'm going to show you how to locate it. Also, when you release it, notice that I'm getting a list of all these configurations. There are better ways of choosing the configuration that you want, especially if you're looking at part numbers. So let's take a look at that. First thing that I want to mention is mate references, and many of you already know about these. In fact, I mentioned them in a previous webinar that I did on mating. But it's important that you select mate references for components that only mate one way. Under your reference geometry flyout, there's an option for mate reference. This is a part option. We can select an edge or a face. A lot of times you want to choose an edge for components like this. It's not going to mate that edge necessarily. It is going to mate the face, the two faces that are connected to that edge. So it works really well. And the other thing I want to mention is how you choose your configurations. A couple of years ago, SOLIDWORKS, actually, they've been working on this for 4 or 5 years. There's something called the configuration publisher. Notice here's all my configurations. I do have a design table that drives these. Rather than choosing the configurations, you can create an interface for picking those. Right-click up here at the top of your configuration manager. Use the configuration publisher. I believe you do have to have a design table if you want to use this. It can't be manually created configurations. Now, you've got the dimensions that are in the Excel spreadsheet, those columns, and that's why I think you have to have a design table. Now, you can drag and drop those dimensions in whatever order you want, and I can give these names. Let's see, first length of the shaft, then we can also go with second length. And you don't have to put in all these variables. You can just do 3 of them. This is whether I want a slot or not. We can go ahead and apply that configuration publisher. And once again, that's right-click, configuration publisher is right here. I'm going to go ahead and save this and drag and drop it into our assembly. So this time, notice I get a mate reference, so it pops right in place. And it will add those 2 mates, concentric and coincident, automatically for me. And when I let go, now instead of getting a dialog box with a list of configurations, the property manager comes up where I can select, instead of configuration name, which can sometimes be difficult to know what I'm selecting, I can use parameters. And then I can pick the first length. Sometimes if you pick a length like this 2-inch one, well, there's other second length options that are available, okay? But only these 3 based on the first dimension that I chose. Or maybe this one right here, the 4-inch, has an option to turn off the slot. And see, then you can see the slot go away. So based on your selection from this tree, it's going to give you more selections. It's intuitive that way. So keep in mind using the configuration publisher for dragging and dropping in components that have multiple configurations. Oh, and another thing that I've seen come up as far as questions are concerned is you've got all these components in your design library. What happens if you want to move all those components to a different location? Well, your assemblies are pointing to that original location. And so if you move those folders, then you may be in trouble. I think the best way that I found to help the situation when moving your design library is to go to your options under file locations for each user and select reference documents. If you select reference documents under here, you can choose the new folders where you move the design library to. And that way when the user opens up those assembly documents, it will point to the correct place. When the assembly is saved, it will update the file locations for those components. So keep that in mind if you ever decide to move your design library with all of your components to a different location. And that only applies to parts. It does not apply to the library features and symbols and blocks that you put in here. There's one other item, the simulation. For those of you who are using simulation, or in other words, using FEA inside of SOLIDWORKS, you can also save restraints and loads and things of that nature, even springs and motors inside of the design library. For example, if I start a new study for an FEA, maybe a static study, you can drag and drop these loads from existing studies right into the design library. For example, even something like a fixed face. So I can drag and drop that in. Or a symmetry, drag and drop that over to a face. Okay, without actually going to the command. Maybe a 100-pound load. Drag and drop that over, so I don't even have to specify the magnitude. Maybe even other features like 10 feet of water, 30 feet of water. You can predefine these so that you don't have to add the values in when you apply a pressure. There's other types of other reasons you might use this too. If I create a nonlinear study, not everybody has nonlinear capability, but I can drag and drop in a fully reverse load. The benefit here is the timetable is already set up for applying the load and fully reversing it. I just need to put in the magnitude, the weight, or even a dynamic study, a linear dynamic one. If I'm applying a dynamic load, see, I can define one ahead of time and add it to my design library. So here's my dynamic load with all the values that I need. Okay, so I don't have to go digging for this load if I'm going to use it for multiple studies or multiple files. So keep in mind when using this, it's not just for static studies, nonlinear studies. It's also for even thermal studies. If you want to apply natural air convection to a face, or forced water convection, or maybe a heat power, microchip heat power over to a component, you can save all those boundary conditions in here so you don't have to redefine them every time. Even motion studies I mentioned for applying oscillatory motors, or maybe you've got equations or formulas that you're using for forces or springs. You can drag and drop these into your motion studies once you have created them. And all of those are just a matter of dragging and dropping the force or boundary condition right into the design library to save them. So you don't even have to hit the Add to Library button. I've got a few minutes here, and I am going to get to questions, but let me just reiterate a couple of things that I just touched on earlier. I don't have time to cover these in depth. It's the other items that are in the design library, like, for example, 3D Content Central. I'd like to ask a question because I'm not sure if how many users are actually using 3D Content Central. So let me launch a quick poll. 3D Content Central is a place where you can go to download, again, commonly used files from vendors like SMC or Destaco. If you're looking for a component out of a catalog, then you can find it in here and drag and drop it into your assemblies. 3D Content Central, the supplier content portion, has over 500 companies now who have subscribed to it and have taken the time to put their catalog in there so that you can drag and drop that part directly into your assembly documents. So check it out if you haven't already. The other item in here is SOLIDWORKS content. Oh, by the way, I should mention with supplier with the 3D Content Central. Supplier content contains a lot of the companies that you're familiar with, Read Tool, things of that nature. The user library would be used if you cannot find the component you need. There are over 1 million users of SOLIDWORKS out there, and they love to share their data. There are just thousands and thousands of components in here, and they're very easy to search for, like electrical components, things of that nature you can find in there. Even some pretty wild parts that some people just want to share with the world. SOLIDWORKS content, if I'm going to use weldments as an example, if you create weldments in SOLIDWORKS, you'll probably find that there are only a handful of profiles available when you're creating those. In this folder, you can download, there are over 5,000 profiles available for you to download. Go here and download a standard that you're looking for, like ANSI inch. And again, there are thousands of profiles in there that you can use for weldments. And then there's also other components that you can use for routing, more elbows, different types of pipes, flanges. And there's also additional blocks too. I should mention this one. If you're creating electrical schematic drawings or hydraulic schematic drawings, then there are hundreds of symbols that you can download from these two folders as well. So I highly suggest accessing those if you're creating those schematics inside of SOLIDWORKS. Well, I'm getting close to the end of the presentation here. I do have one request for everyone. On the last slide of my presentation, there is my email address. We do our best to create these lunch and learn sessions based on what we think might interest you. If you do have any interesting topics, then feel free to email me directly, send me a message directly. Or if you have any comments on existing webcasts, then feel free to send me a message. That's about it. I want to thank you all for joining us. Please visit our website for future webcasts and tips and tricks in SOLIDWORKS. And feel free to stick around for a few minutes if you have questions that you posted already. Otherwise, for everyone else, have a great day and enjoy your weekend.